Hello, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Pod Save Chocolate. My name is Clay Gordon. I'm your host and moderator. I'm also the creator and the publisher of thechocolatelife.com. Today, we're going to be revisiting a subject that's been sort of central to a number of episodes in the past month or so, but I want to provide some additional thinking because I think it's really important, especially as we start thinking about how the current harvest in cocoa is heading on in Ghana and the rest of Western Africa, and what that means for the future of craft chocolate. And that's the title of today's episode, Rethinking Craft Chocolate. Before we begin, what I want to do is I want to say thank you to members of the Chocolate Life, because this episode of Pod Save Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. If you're not a member, go over there and become a member. There's always a free tier. Also, no matter where you're listening or watching today, whether it's on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook, you can go into the live chat or into the comments. Let me know where in the world you are connecting from. I'll give that shout out up on screen. And then also, if you have a question or a comment, I can get that up on screen and get it asked and answered during the course of the hour. This is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. If you're watching, this is the homepage of the Chocolate Life right now. And for every episode of Pod Save Chocolate, I put together a post which is dedicated to that episode. And here is the post for today. And there are links and resources that you can look to while you're watching live or listening live, or after the fact. So you don't have to pay attention to where the URLs are of any given one. And I put them here on this page rather than in the posts on YouTube, LinkedIn, or Facebook. Everything is here on the Chocolate Life in one place. So just wanted to give everybody a quick heads up by that, if this is the first episode you've ever been listening to. And one thing you may want to ask yourself is, why is this Rethinking Craft Chocolate? Why have I put a bunch of pictures of boxes right in here? And that's because there is a well-known saying, as you may know, which is you have to think outside the box. And so if we have these picture of boxes, scroll back up to the top, we have these pictures of boxes. That's what this represents. Right? We have to think outside the box. Now, people may know of a new age guru by the name of Deepak Chopra. And Deepak, Mr. Chopra, right, is known for saying, it's not enough to think outside the box. You need to throw the box away, right? And there's a lot to be said about that idea, which is it's really, really difficult to question assumptions and have new ideas and really think innovatively if you're looking at the box you're supposed to be thinking outside of, right? And my thought about that is, it's not enough to throw the box away. You need to forget what boxes are. If you really want to be truly innovative, you need to forget what boxes are, right? Not just think outside them. And a lot of that has to do with the idea of questioning assumptions. If you're going to question an assumption, right, what does that mean? What are the implications of questioning your assumptions? And then what does it mean in terms of the interpretations? Because the words you use have an influence on your beliefs influence your actions, and actions have consequences. And so if we're going to be re-examining the boxes, we're going to forget what the boxes are, and we're going to start questioning assumptions and the words we use. What does that mean coming out the other side? What does that mean for what we're going to do, right, if we question the assumptions? And one of the places where this becomes really quite obvious, at least in my opinion, is that if you call yourself a bean-to-bar chocolate maker, chances are your focus is on making bars. And for many, many years, bean-to-bar chocolate makers made chocolate bars. That's what they did, right? And a lot of that might have had to do with the fact that they just bought into an assumption that that's what it meant to be an artisan chocolate maker, a craft chocolate maker, a bean-to-bar chocolate maker. You start with beans and you end up with bars, right? And if you do that, what you end up doing is you end up, I'm gesturing right now for people who are listening, you end up building blinkers around your thinking, blinders around your thinking. You're looking one particular way, right? And in reality, I think, right, what you want to be thinking is, rather than calling myself a bean-to-bar chocolate maker and making bars, what you want to do is you say, I am a chocolate maker. What is it that I can make with the chocolate that I make. Now, the very, very simplest way of thinking of this, instead of being a bean to bar chocolate maker, maybe I can be a bean to bark chocolate maker. They're really, really simple. Why would I make chocolate bark instead of chocolate bars? Well, number one, it solves a whole bunch of production problems. Number one, right? You know, you don't have to worry about so much about molds. It's easier to work with lots of inclusions, decorating on the back. There are some production issues associated with how do you cut it into regular sized pieces, right? And then you have, you know, and you're really now selling by weight, right? And there are issues associated with that. It's a different set of issues. But at least now what I've done is I've stepped out the side that, you know, I've stepped out of the box of I need molds and I need to fill the molds and all that kind of stuff. And if I'm going to be working, you know, as a chocolate maker, now what can I do? Well, you know, maybe what you can do is you can make slabbed ganaches. Maybe you can make shell molded pieces. Maybe you can make hand rolled pieces. Maybe you can engross or pan pieces. You might make a spread. There are lots of things that you can make, right? When you're not calling yourself a bean to bar chocolate maker and limiting yourself to bars. And one of the other places where this bean to bar controversy is going is, what does it mean to be a bean to bar chocolate maker? Right. So the term was coined in the late 1990s by Bob Steinberg and John Scharfenberger, who were the co-founders of Scharfenberger Chocolate Maker, and they created it as a phrase which is going to distinguish themselves from bigger industrial chocolate makers. So, you know, specifically, John was thinking, how do we do an American version of sort of Valrhona, right? That's where he was thinking of. Now, John got his training, right, as a champagne blender for Veuve Clicquot, moved to the United States, started Scharfenberger Wine Cellars, where he was doing sparkling California wines, sold that, and that's where he got the some of the funds to start Scharfenberger Chocolate Maker. But you know, it started out as this reaction to sort of traditional European and specifically French style chocolate making. He wanted to create an American version of that. And interestingly enough, the first couple of years, everything they did was blended. I mean, that makes sense. Champagne is a blended product. There's not a whole lot of vintage champagnes out there in the world. They do exist, of course, but it is the exception rather than the rule. And Scharfenberger, when they started out making blended chocolates, they did not kick off the unblended single origin 2-ingredient movement within the craft chocolate or the bean to bar chocolate movement. It's important to know that bean to bar is first and foremost just a description of process. I buy beans, I make bars. That's it. The challenge with taking bean to bar, right, and using it more broadly is when people start layering on other concerns. Well, in order to be a bean to bar chocolate maker, you must be ethical. In order to be a bean to bar chocolate maker, you must be something else, right? In order to do it. Otherwise, you're not really bean to bar. One of the places where this rears its head is ownership. In order to be a bean to bar chocolate maker, all of the processes involved with making the chocolate must be done in a facility that you own, right? You own the facility, or you know, your bank owns that facility, right? And you know, not everybody has the same exact interpretation of what it means from a process, starting with beans and ownership, right, of the equipment or the facility, whatever it is. And not everybody agrees on what other kinds of concepts need to be layered on top of bean to bar. And so the question becomes, is there a better term than bean to bar that we can use? And so there are a number of terms that have grown out as sort of descriptors or adjectives around bean to bar. So I'm a craft bean to bar chocolate maker. I'm an artisan bean to bar chocolate maker. And some of the questions become, what does it mean? You know, what does craft mean? And how is craft different from artisan? And how is craft different from bean to bar? So one of the things that bean to bar doesn't talk about, it just says start with beans and end with bars. One of the things that bean to bar doesn't talk about is size, right? So if you're going to be a bean to bar chocolate maker, you can be a bean to bar chocolate maker if you have a single 8-pound little wet grinder, right? Or you can be a bean to bar chocolate maker if you have a 3 metric ton universal. I mean, there's nothing in it that says anything about the size. And people have tried to use size as an indicator of what it means to be sort of craft or artisan when it comes to making chocolate. So are you a craft chocolate maker or an artisan chocolate maker as long as you're using machinery which has less than what? 100 kilogram batch size, 200 kilogram batch size. You can't be a craft chocolate maker if you make more than 10 tons a year or 20 tons a year or 30 tons a year. These become very, very difficult questions to answer, right? And to get buy-in from the larger community. And why are we going through this conversation is that why am I going through this conversation? Why am I rethinking what craft chocolate means? And how do we communicate it? Is because as a group, we haven't done a good job of communicating the value proposition of craft chocolate to the larger community. If chocolate is a $180 billion a year industry, then perhaps craft chocolate maybe is 2%, if we're lucky, right, of that entire industry. What's remarkable about it, if we think about it in another way, is like, after 20 years, it's only 2% of the industry. What are we doing wrong? Or can we do things better to explain the value proposition of what we're doing? But when we think about it, there are somewhere between 3,000 and 5,000 small chocolate makers around the world, 500 in Peru alone. And when we think about how many cocoa beans as a community we purchase, if we think about how much chocolate we make as of the value of that chocolate we make, I mean, we're larger than Tony's Chocolonely is, for example, as a group. What is the difference between Tony's Chocolonely and the quote unquote craft artisan specialty bean to bar chocolate world is they speak with one voice. Right? So they have a marketing budget, they have marketing ideas, and they spend a lot of time thinking about what it means to be communicate, right, around the idea of their raison d'etre of eliminating illegal labor and slavery from their cocoa supply chain. They speak with a singular voice, right? And that's not what we do in the world of bean to bar, craft, specialty, whatever it is that you want to call it, chocolate. And therefore, it's important to continue to rethink what it means to be craft chocolate, I think. That's the proposition that I've been talking about for some time. We explored that. David Nilsson and I of the Bean to Barstool podcast, we explored that concept. First on Bean to Barstool from the point of view of chocolate looking at beer, and then on an episode of Pod Safe Chocolate from the point of view of beer looking at chocolate, craft beer looking at craft chocolate. And for those of you who haven't had a chance to listen or watched either of those episodes, they're linked to in the notes for this episode of Pod Safe Chocolate. So there's a link to the episode on the Chocolate Life, Pod Safe Chocolate, and then there's a link to the Bean to Barstool episode as well. If you're watching right now, I'm hovering over the card to the episode on the Chocolate Life for Pod Safe Chocolate, so episode 57. But within that card, there is a link to the Bean to Barstool podcast right here. Right, so you can get at to it, and I do recommend going and read it. It's an interesting read and an interesting listen to follow up, and it gives you some background and it gives you some history of what it is I'm talking about. Right, and so people may not know, if you're not a member of the Chocolate Life and don't receive the monthly newsletter, you may not know that every month, usually on the third Sunday of the month, I hold a members AMA call. So if you are a member of the Chocolate Life, whether a premium member or a free member, you can join me on a Google Meet call. And we can talk about whatever it is that you want to talk about. You can ask me questions about your business. You can ask me questions. I mean, as long as it's about cocoa and chocolate, you can ask me anything and we can engage in a conversation. Sometimes nobody shows up for one reason or another. Sometimes one person shows up, sometimes more. But this is an opportunity for me to engage with everyone on a one-to-one basis. And discuss whatever it is they want to talk about. So I had a chocolate maker, Midwest United States, was the only person who joined me this past Sunday, and we had what ended up being a 3-hour call. We spent the first 90 minutes on his ideas and the last 90 minutes on some of my ideas. And the question he had for me, and the question that we talked about in great detail, was we talked about, I am a chocolate maker. And I, work in small batches, and I take care of, to source my cocoa beans as ethically as I can, to do the best job that I can. All of the things that we think of as part of the ethos of being a small chocolate maker. And one of the questions he asked me is, okay, the price of cocoa beans is going up, right? And the price of cocoa butter is going up. What are some of the things that I can do, right? So to be able to weather the economic changes that are going. As a small maker who's not buying huge quantities of beans, they're not in control of the price that they pay. Whatever the price is on the market when he's buying, that's what it is that he's paying. And it doesn't matter who he's buying from, he has no control over the prices. All he can do is control his own costs. So he's trying to reduce the cost, or he's trying to keep the cost of beans in control. He's trying to keep the cost of, expensive ingredients, cocoa butter and other things, under control. Right. And, where are we right now? I mean, let's just do a quick aside and go, where are we right now when it comes to the price of cocoa? Right. And so let's go take a look at the futures market. Right. So we're looking at pricing over the last 3 months. The current price, this is the cash price if you want to buy today, is at about $7,860 a metric ton. That was the close for yesterday. I don't have today's price. I can get today's price for you, but it's down from 8,300 2 or 3 days ago. It's been all over the place. About a month ago, it was almost 11,000, and so we're seeing this this change in pricing. But one of the things that so if I go and actually take a look, let's go to a different view of this. It turns out that the September price is 8,000, December is under 7,000, and it looks like it's hitting down, over the next 2 years to be around $5,400 a metric ton, right? And the real question is, what's going on? Why? Why is this? Why is the price going down? And one of the reasons why that has been given for the price going down over the course of the last couple of months is that everybody was hopeful that the mid-harvest in Ghana would be back to normal, right? And it turns out, if we actually go look, here's a post from Reuters, and it says that this year's harvest is about half of what it is that is normally expected, with the off-harvest, the mid-harvest being almost complete. And the question becomes, why is the price where it is? Why aren't we looking at, more aggressive changes in the price of cocoa? Well, number one is, it may be that people are a little more sanguine. They have an idea that, Ghana is saying that next year's harvest is going to be back to normal, and so people are not panicking the way they did. It also may be that speculators are not jumping into the market the way they did, right? And so those two things are combining for a slower rise in the price of cocoa, but it's something we'll have to look at very, very carefully over the course of the next weeks and months, as the real impact of the 2023-2024 harvest figures come in, right? And people may know, I use an AI search engine called Perplexity, right? And one of the reasons why I use it is it provides me summaries, and I can look at summaries, and then it also provides me sources for things. So rather than Google or DuckDuckGo, when what it does is it provides me a list of things, and what I have to do is I have to go and look at each one to find out what it's telling me. What I can do is I can ask a simple question like the Ghana 2024 cocoa harvest, which is what you're looking at now, it will provide me sources like the Reuters article, which I was pointing to. Always like to find primary sources when I can find them, right? But what we find is that for the current 23-24 season, production only reached in Ghana, it was like 430,000 metric tons, which is then less than 55% of the average output. So this year's harvest through the end is nowhere near what it was that people expected, because, man, it's down from about 800,000 metric tons. The decline is attributed to adverse weather, disease, illegal gold mining, and smuggling. This is in Ghana in particular. So Ghana's cocoa board projected that the 2023-24 cocoa harvest is a 22-year low. So we're looking at a 22-year low in the cocoa harvest, and the third year in a row where there's been a shortfall compared with forecasts. Right? And it's sort of interesting, right, that we're not seeing, given this news, right, a more severe spike in the rise of cocoa. Right? It may be that this price has been baked in, so it's been priced into the market, for want of a pun intended. And it may be that people are going, okay, the Ghanaian government is assuring us that what's happening is that next year's harvest is going to be back to normal. We're going to be back to over 800,000 metric tons. So other people have said, if we're lucky, we'll get to 700,000 metric tons for the 2024-25 season. And other people are saying that 800,000 metric tons is optimistic. So unfortunately, unfortunately, for the purposes of this, I haven't gone and looked at the primary sources to push back on this. What I do, however, is I do have the link, and I'm going to find it in the Reuters article. And I don't remember if I put the link to the Reuters article. I didn't, and so I just took a quote of it. So what I will do is I will put a link to the Reuters article, this one here, the Ghana cocoa harvest article, in the notes for today's post, right? In today's post for today's podcast, so that you can go and listen to this directly, right, or read this directly and gather your own opinions, because you may decide that I don't know what I'm talking about. You may decide that you want to fact check me. That was the topic of the last episode of Pod Safe Chocolate we did. He's like, hey, you need to fact check me. All right. I try to do the best job that I can, right, in terms of finding primary sources and make sure that I'm reporting facts. I try to be open about what's my opinion as opposed to what I see written as facts. So you should always fact check me. And listen, if you find anything wrong with my work, go into the comments, whether you're watching on YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, or if you're a Chocolate Life member, you can comment on any post on the Chocolate Life and let me know. If you think I've done something wrong, if you've got a primary source, you can let me know what your primary source is, and I can look it up and I can go say, I'm wrong. I want to be right. I don't necessarily, it's not about, if my ego is tied up in anything, it's about being right. Right. And so I want to be correct. I want to be able to talk about the factual data, not, I'm right about a particular thing in a particular way. I hope I made that distinction clear. Right. And so this is why it's really, really important. So we can look at the Ghana 2024 cocoa harvest and see what it has to say. The same engine will talk about the Ivory Coast 2024 cocoa harvest. So, unfortunately, for one reason or another, I don't have the specificity with the Ivory Coast numbers that I did with the Ghana numbers. Not entirely sure where that is, but what we do is we see that that cocoa coming out of Ivory Coast was somewhere between 450 and 500,000 tons, lower than 550,000 tons from last year. And this is just the mid-crop production, not the total production. And so production is down, right? And we don't entirely know, of course, because this is an agricultural commodity and we have no way of predicting the weather 6 months out or 8 months out or 9 months out. We don't actually know what production is going to be. One of the reasons why Ghana is a little more optimistic about production figures for next year is that there's going to be delivery of fertilizers and pesticides to farmers, right? And they believe that will reduce. I don't know that there's actually a cure for cocoa swollen shoot virus, which is one of the big problems in Ghana. Anyway, so we shall see. I mean, the verdict is out. The jury is out. We don't know what production is going to be next year. And so the question becomes, okay, if I'm going to be a chocolate maker, right, what can I do to be able to insulate myself to some extent, right, against the changes in cocoa prices? They're probably only going to go up, right? And right now they're double what they were a year ago still. I mean, it's important to know that. I mean, the prices are double. And the price of cocoa butter is like 2x, 2.5x, 3x what it was a year ago. And so if you're make a lot of white chocolate, for example, right? You have a challenge because okay, cocoa butter is the primary ingredient after, and sugar are the primary ingredients in making white chocolate, and cocoa butter is very, very expensive. So what am I going to do, right? And um, I think that the answer to that question, I personally think that the answer to the question is around this notion of bean to bar, right? If you think of yourself as a bean to bar chocolate maker and all you're making is bars, you need to rethink your commitment to making bars, right? And you need to make other things, right, which are priced differently, right? And people perceive as being higher value, right? So that people who are conditioned to spending $4 on a bar of chocolate look at a bar of chocolate and say it's $12. Not everybody is going to be able to make that leap, right? So what are they purchasing? They're purchasing confections in which chocolate is one of the ingredients. So this is where panned items are very, very nice. I can take a nut, I can cover the nut in chocolate, and I can sell chocolate covered hazelnuts, chocolate covered whatever it is, right? And it turns out that people are price these things differently. The value of those things are different from, right, the way they think of a chocolate bar. And maybe what you're doing is you're doing a blended chocolate, so you're using a mixture of beans rather than focusing only on very expensive single origin beans. Or you could do a blend of beans, like a South American blend or a Latin American blend or a Caribbean blend, right, where you've got a range of beans which provide an interesting flavor. Blending is your friend. You're able to be more consistent when you blend than if you're doing a single origin. Chocolate for them, if you're talking about very specifically a single estate, a single farm or a single region, beans, when you blend them, give you a range of flavoring opportunities, and you can change the roast and you can change the ratios and dial in on a particular flavor profile, which becomes easier to replicate. So blending at every level. If you have a bag of beans, if you have 5 bags of beans, open up all 5 bags, blend them together. And if there are any bag-to-bag differences, which is very, very common when you have multiple farmers, these multiple farmers are going to a cooperative and you have a bag of beans from one farmer and a bag of beans from another farmer. If they're all doing their own fermentation, they're going to be slightly different. And so if you try to make chocolate from those 2 different bags, even though they come from the same place, right, the same cooperative, they might taste very, very different, right? And often you can see this visually when you open up the bags. But if you've got 5 bags of beans, you open up all the bags of beans and you mix them together, then what you've done is you've blended out the bag-to-bag differences. If you need to do multiple roasts, right, you can blend the roasts together. If you need to do multiple small batches to get a larger batch, you can blend the batches together. And any batch-to-batch differences, you'll be able to blend out. I mean, it can still be called single origin. All the beans come from the same place, but what you've done is you've been able to make a more consistent product. And that notion of consistency is going to become important in a little while. Again, put a pin on it. I'm going to come back to that. Panned items, for example, are going to be priced very differently in people's minds. They think about buying a panned coffee beans or panned nuts or panned jellies or panned something else. They think about them very, very differently. If I've got a bark, for example, I'm going to be able to price it differently because I'm charging for it by the pound, not the piece. And people think about that very differently. Also, if you're doing barks, you have a lot of inclusions. Right? You've got a lot of inclusions, and the inclusions are like, they don't have to be really, really expensive. They can be very inexpensive. And one of the really important things there is you need to think very, very carefully about what you're going to fall on your sword for. If you are, in fact, a 2-ingredient, single origin chocolate maker, right, then everything has to be perfect all the time, right? So your beans need to be perfect, your roast need to be perfect, your process needs to be perfect, because there's nowhere to hide. You need to be perfect every single time. And if your beans come in and they are below your standard, right, what do? Do you send the beans back? Do you make chocolate with those substandard beans? I mean, this has been a problem that many people have had to struggle with. And the answer is, if you're doing blending and other things like that, or you're adding a lot of inclusions, not necessarily a lot of inclusions, if you're adding inclusions, those issues become very, very different, right? So, right, think about that as we go. And we have a little comment from Zélia Francione of Chocolatras in Brazil. I think that besides creating new products, chocolate education is necessary and urgent. Most consumers still don't know craft chocolate and the difference to traditional chocolate. I was going to get to that. Zélia, I mean, it's a good question. It's a really, really good question. So chocolate education. So the challenge becomes, what is the point of entry? Where do you start with chocolate education, right? When it comes to here's craft chocolate as opposed to traditional chocolate. And the word traditional is really interesting, because I try to think, I think about language and the use of language and how most people would use the word traditional. And I realize that Brazil, right, is not the United States. And, you in particular, and the Associação Bean de Bar Brazil, and others have done a really good job of carving out and sort of defending what you mean by bean de bar, right? And that's very different from the United States. So we need to keep that in mind. Now, what I have done is I have said we have craft chocolate on one hand, and we have industrial chocolate on the other. And so I think what you're thinking about as traditional chocolate is what I would call industrial chocolate. And one of the conversations that I had this weekend, as I said during my monthly meeting, 90 minutes on their questions and then 90 minutes on my questions, is that is the word industrial as the other side, right, of craft, is it a good word? So industrial means big, right? And so what we're doing is we are saying that craft chocolate maker, the differentiation between craft chocolate makers and industrial chocolate makers is solely around size, right? And I don't think that, so thank you for that. You're saying traditional, right, is industrial. So what I want to do, and this is where we came to after a couple of hours of talking, what I want to do, and this is something that I've been thinking about for the last 5 days, and it's something that I'm going to move forward with, right? Is I'm going to stop using industrial, right? So let's see why that makes it. I personally want to get to a point, and I'm pushing for the point, that what we're going to do is that the world of chocolate should adopt a language that is based in the world of coffee. So we have specialty coffee, right? And by definition, a specialty coffee beverage is any coffee that is made with specialty cocoa beans. Now, at the moment, specialty coffee beans. At the moment, specialty coffee beans are ones which have received a particular Q grading score, right? So there's a very specific mechanisms that trained tasters go through to say this is a specialty coffee bean, right? We have the start of a mechanism, which is the Cacao of Excellence program, and we have all of the guidelines for determining what a specialty cocoa bean looks like. And it's actually defined not on the equivalent of cupping, which is what coffee does, but on actually, does this bean make good chocolate? So there's work that needs to be done, but we can say that a specialty chocolate is any chocolate made with specialty cocoa beans. And while we don't have a perfect definition for specialty cocoa beans today, we can say, okay, over the course of the next 5 years, we're going to come at a definition for what specialty cocoa beans means. And so what we've done is we've said, we have a way of thinking about the beans, specialty, and specialty chocolate. And specialty chocolate as opposed to what? Well, in coffee, the obverse, the other side of the specialty, is commodity. So commodity coffee is coffee that is made from commodity coffee beans. And I think that's where it is that we might want to go. Commodity chocolate versus specialty chocolate, commodity coffee versus craft chocolate. And what is the difference between those two things? In a commodity chocolate, the maker starts off with the end goal in mind, right? So a commodity chocolate, if I am a fan of Hershey's chocolate, or I'm a fan of Cacao Show, or Copenhagen, just bring up two Brazilian manufacturers, I have an idea in my mind of what that chocolate is going to taste like, right? And so for the maker's point of view, I need to make sure that my chocolate tastes like that every single time. And so the definition of a commodity maker is that when, number one, they start off with the end goal in mind. So no matter what the beans taste like, I need to end up with something that tastes the same, right? And if I get as close as I can, throw a little vanilla on the top, and vanilla is a masking aroma and it hides the differences. That's what it's there for. It's there to mask defects and hide, right, differences from batch to batch, or from week to week, or month to month, or harvest to harvest. And it becomes a commodity chocolate when the concerns of the customers are what's primary. I need to make this chocolate taste the same every single time. Right. So again, Zelia, standardization, absolutely right. So the hallmark of industrial products is consistency. If I come out of a factory, if I'm making a car, I want to make sure that every single part of the car is the same, right? It doesn't work, because we have cars that, even though they're made from the same parts, some of them run better than others. So there are tolerances, and you can have a bunch of parts that are out of tolerance in one direction, and your car doesn't run as nice as a car where all the parts are in tolerances in the other direction, and it runs much better. But the goal is that, to the extent possible, we want it to be the same. It looks the same, it acts the same, it tastes the same, right? And so I'm going to make the chocolate so that, because my customers want the Hershey milk chocolate bar that they ate last week, right, to taste like the Hershey milk chocolate bar that they ate 2 months ago, and that it will taste the same 2 months from now. So consistency, right, and repeatability is really important. Or if I am somebody who's making confectionery, I'm making enrobed chocolate bars or enrobed candy bars, Snickers, Three Musketeers, things like that. And I'm doing it on a very, very fast production line, thousands of pieces per hour or more. I need to make sure that the rheology, the flow characteristics of the chocolate are the same every single time. Because as a maker who's got these machines, I don't want to have to tweak my machines ever. I want the chocolate to be exactly the same, so that it will flow around my pieces the same every single time, right? Or if I'm using the chocolate or the cocoa powder in a baked good, I want the acidity to be the same, because if I'm using a leavening agent, I want the rise to be the same. And so for a commodity chocolate maker, number one, they're using commodity cocoa beans as opposed to specialty cocoa beans. That's a good parallel to make. They're using commodity beans, and they're making a chocolate where the concerns of the customer are primary. If I'm a craft chocolate maker, a specialty chocolate maker, I'm making specialty chocolate from specialty cocoa beans. And what happens is that every batch of beans, every new harvest of beans represents new flavor opportunities, right? So I get to express the flavor of these beans, right, through my own lens. I'm going to take my artistic idea as a chocolate maker, and I'm going to take these beans and I'm going to make flavors which express my ideas. And that's turns out to be very, 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 very important. And 7 different chocolate makers can take the same beans and create very, very different results. I might be making a French style chocolate. I might be making a 2-ingredient, an American style 2-ingredient chocolate, because that's where in modern times the movement came from. It actually harkens back to pre-1847 styles of chocolate making. So it's a retro movement in that respect as much as it is a modern movement. 1847 is when the Fry family is first reported to have added cocoa butter into chocolate. So it's important to understand that history. We talked about that intertwingularity, where we think about topics as being distinct, right? But everything is related and everything is connected. So it's important to know that, right? So one of the things that came out of this conversation over the weekend was whether it makes sense to start using the word commodity and the parallels in coffee between specialty and commodity coffee, and think about them, because we don't think about industrial coffee. That's not the way the language is. It's commodity coffee and specialty coffee, commodity coffee, specialty cocoa, right? Specialty chocolate, commodity cocoa, commodity chocolate. And let me know what you think. I mean, if you like that idea, I mean, because you think it makes sense, right? And we get away from the notion that the difference between craft chocolate and industrial chocolate is scale, right? So something like artisan might talk a little bit more about hands-on. It's important to know, but artisan and craft are not necessarily synonymous. What I want to do is I want to focus on intent, right? So commodity chocolate is about starting off with the end goal in mind, and craft chocolate is saying, what are the creative opportunities which are represented by the beans that I have in hand, right? Let me know if you think that's a good idea. If you prefer industrial, to continue with it. If you like, the parallels between specialty coffee beans, specialty cocoa beans, specialty coffee, specialty chocolate. I'm curious to know what your thoughts are on those. What I want to do is I want to do a quick shout out to Mayana, Maria from Ontario. Thanks for doing a great job of sharing information and being yourself a source that we can trust. Maria, thank you very much. I do my best to be a source that you can trust, but I'm human, I'm fallible. I look at things and I come to my own interpretations. There's no such thing as a plain reading, especially if it comes from a foreign language. If I try to translate French into English or English into French, and then I'm reading the French translation or the English translation, that's an interpretation. And then I put my interpretation on top of it, right? So it is really, really a challenge. And, as I mentioned to Zelia earlier, I mean, I'm speaking from the United States, right? And I definitely have a North American and particularly American Canadian thought here, although Canadian cocoa culture and chocolate culture is going to be different from American chocolate culture. And so there is no plain reading of the text, right? Because we need to throw in cultural assumptions. I do my best to at least be aware, of, what these assumptions are and what is going on. And I try really, really hard. But call me to account. Let me know what you think if I got this wrong, because I think it's very, very important that we go ahead and think about these things. So Zelia, I like commodity chocolate and specialty chocolate terms, but it wouldn't work in Portuguese. Okay, so I'm interested in knowing, there is specialty coffee in Brazil. And commodity coffee in Brazil. I'm sort of interested in what the language is around those terms, and maybe there are parallels that we can draw, right? Right. Right. When we talk about assumptions, I'm doing this in English, right? And the Specialty Coffee Association, the primary language is English. So what I probably need to do is go to the SCA documents where they talk about specialty, and then look at the translations into other languages and see what terms they use. But it's a really, really good point. I mean, I'm sitting here, right? Even though I know a little bit of French, I know a little bit German, I know a little bit Italian, I know a little Spanish, I know some Portuguese, right? Everything I'm thinking about is looked at the lens through the English language, right? So why is this all important, right? The reason why is that if we as a group of makers, if we're a group of enthusiasts, if we are the people who want to be able to educate, as Zelia said, we want to communicate about what our value proposition is. Why should people care about this chocolate, craft chocolate, as opposed to traditional / industrial / commodity? Why should it care? If we're not clear about what we mean, if we disagree with each other, it's no wonder that consumers are confused. And so we've been thinking about chocolate this way for how long, right? Well, the modern sort of specialty chocolate movement, single origin chocolate, modern 1984, right? The craft chocolate, the bean to bar movement is 1996, 1997. The craft chocolate movement, I mean, is, as a term, as an alternative to bean to bar and artisan, a couple of years later. This is all very, very new, right? And we're trying to do this localization of language and localization of culture, and trying to come up with a set of terms that we can use, right? Because if we want to start educating people, we want to be able to talk to them the same way, right? And that's why that's important. Okay, so they say café especial, and by the way, that's a Spanish pronunciation of it. It's not a Portuguese pronunciation. So chocolate especial would just confuse consumers. Okay, okay, I got it. Um, so the question is, what does work? How do we convey that same concept, right, in for chocolate, in the same way we do for cafe, right? Um, right? Part of the larger dialogue that we can have. So, we spend a lot of time talking about all of this kind of stuff. And so I want to go back to the original question, which is which kicked off this discussion for me this past Sunday during the members AMA call. And by the way, you can go to the Chocolate Life right now. You can click on a little button up here. I'm logged in, so it says account. You're supposed to join if you're not a member and you're not logged in. Click join. There's always a free member. This episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, like every episode of Pod Safe Chocolate, is sponsored by the members of the Chocolate Life. And if you're watching on YouTube, go and do a thumbs up on this video and then subscribe to the Pod Safe Chocolate channel. Would appreciate the support in that ways as well. If you are a member of the Chocolate Life, you get members-only content. You get to join the members-only call once a month, and then there's also the ability to comment on any post that you like to. And I read every comment on every post, and I respond to all of them as well. So there is that opportunity as a special member. If you want to become a premium member, I don't use Patreon. I'm not ads at the moment. You have the opportunity to get consulting. So an hour of coaching and an hour of private coaching and consulting time, depending upon the level of membership. So just wanted to let you know about all of those things. So again, where do we go from here? So I think that one of the things that everybody can do, if you are a chocolate maker, right, and what you want to do is you want to expand your reach, right? While you may continue to make bars, right? What I would do is I would say, 20% of your products need to make 80% of your revenue, and you need to have cash cows. You need to have things that people are going to want to come in every week and buy again, right? That if all you're doing is 2 ingredients, single origin chocolate, high cocoa content Coke bars, that repeat customers, you might have very, 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 very dedicated customers, people who are big fans of the work that you do, but that becomes, the hardest stuff to do repeat sales on. Am I going to buy, the same 90% single origin chocolate bar every week? Maybe not, right? And it's important to understand that you are not sacrificing your artistic integrity, right, by making other stuff. Right? You can make milk chocolate bars. You can make white chocolate bars. You can make other things. You can add inclusions. You can add flavors. You are not sacrificing your artistic integrity. What you can do is say, I have received this really, really special bag of beans. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a limited edition, right? Single origin from this harvest, and it's going to be special, and I'm going to make it special, and it represents, sort of my signature position as a chocolate maker, right? That you can do. But if that's the only thing you do, you treat every single bag of beans and every single bar you make, what you're doing is you're limiting your audience. If you do not have, right, a product that you can sell at an impulse to a 5-year-old, right, you're missing a market. What we want to do is we want to have products which fit this, specialty chocolate, this craft chocolate world, which appeal to much younger audiences. We want to be able to get them interested at as early an age as possible in what it means to be specialty, what it means to be craft, right? So that as they grow older, they are going to preferentially want this stuff. And so saying, well, it has to be 70%. There's nothing wrong with making something at 55, right? It's got more sugar in it, and it's likely it can be a great chocolate, but it might be more accessible to someone who's 9 or 10, right? It doesn't have to be something which is a higher cocoa content. It's really, really important to take the blinders off, right? To, as you say, think outside the box, throw the box away, forget what boxes are, is to go and question your assumptions. 70%, that there's no magic number there. That's just something that people made up starting in the 1990s, really, right? And we've just bought into it, right? There's no reason to do it. And so what are some of the things that you might do? Now, if you are a craft chocolate maker, if you're a specialty chocolate maker, what you do is you might start off, right, thinking about what does my local market look like, right? So maybe you do sell online. Maybe you don't have retail distribution outside of the area that you've got. Where do I come up with ideas for things, right? Where do I come up with ideas for products which are going to resonate with my local market? And I think that's where you want to think about doing that. Before I jump into my suggestions for some of the places you go look at things, right? I'm going to take another comment from Maria in Canada. Totally agree with you. The best way to differentiate is by referring to it as specialty chocolate. I'm a craft chocolate maker, don't make bars. I make drinking chocolate. So you make a specialty drinking chocolate, right? And what makes your specialty drinking chocolate special? You use specialty cocoa beans. You use cocoa beans that are revered as or recognized, right, for having special flavor attributes, right? And that's what, starting from that base, that differentiates what you do, right? And the craft aspect of this is that what you do is you say, I am going to use the flavors of these beans, right? And, it's going to be vintage. The 2024 is going to taste different from the 2025. That might be something that you do. Or what you're going to do is you say, I artfully blend things. I take specialty beans and I blend them so that from, I'm going to do that, hands-on work to be able to tweak things, right? So there are lots of ways of going about talking about it. But that specialty cocoa beans make specialty chocolate, at least in North America. So yeah, at least in North America works. I think that framing works really, really well. All right. And just, hey, Mike from Kansas City, Missouri, nice of you to join us. And if anybody wants to know, it's like, I've had conversations with Mike. He's joined me. He's been part of the Craft Chocolate Challenge. And he's been an inspiration to me, and hopefully I've been an inspiration to him. When I was doing my my cross-country move, I ended up visiting Kansas City and visiting Mike in his workshop in Kansas City. So Mike, really, really thanks. So where do you go to get inspirations with things? Number one is you can go around and look at lots of other makers and look at what other makers are using in terms of specialty flavors, are using in terms of interesting flavors. So number one, right? Many of you may know the name Jacques Therese. So Jacques is really famous in the New York City chocolate scene. At one point, he was making chocolate from beans, but many people who know him because he was one of the early chefs who helped form the foundation for the explosive growth of Food Network. It was him and Emerald and a couple other people very early on. Right. And Jacques is a great technician, not necessarily a great flavor guy. And he would be the first to admit that. But Jacques knows what his customers want. And so if you went to his store in New York City, you'd find that one of the most popular things that he made was chocolate covered cereal, Cheerios, Corn Flakes, and things like that. And so can you work with a local granola supplier, for example, and you could make a fun little chocolate covered granola, or you could add cocoa nibs or cocoa powder and make something special, right, with that. Right, because it's a relatively inexpensive, it's a comparatively inexpensive product, and you can add good chocolate at the top of it and make something special. And there are lots of ways to go about doing that. One of which is to focus on bark production, right? Because it's just a lot easier. It's a lot easier to make a bark than it is to make a bar. So just think about how you might go about doing that. So look at when you look at other chocolate makers and what they produce, think about formats, number one, and then number two, think about interesting ingredients. And in this particular case, who doesn't like Cheerios, right? Um, right, or something like that. So there are lots of things, Cocoa Pebbles, Rice Krispies. I mean, there are all sorts of things that one could do. And working with Case Rat at the Metropolitan in Amsterdam, he had white chocolate and milk chocolate and dark chocolate covered crisp rice, right? And you could buy individually, you could buy by weight, it was just really, really simple and very inexpensive comparatively. And it provided a great entree into buying, oh, I like these chocolate and I like these with a cereal in it. And so in the future, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to go buy the chocolate itself and make a nicely product. And you don't need a bakery in order to make that stuff. If you do have a bakery, then obviously, make some baked goods, right? In doing it, there's a a quote unquote viral TikTok YouTube sensation, right? Which is this Dubai chocolate bar, which uses a form of phyllo with pistachio, right? It's like, find out what is really, really viral on YouTube. Find out what's really, really viral, well, YouTube, on TikTok. Find out what's viral on Instagram, and think about those as flavor inspirations for what it is you're doing, especially for short run stuff, right? Using ingredients that might be less expensive. Pistachio paste is not necessarily less expensive than cocoa or chocolate, but you get the idea. Another place that I want to suggest that everybody go is look around, right, where they are. And so I've got, again, Perplexity up here, right? And I did a quick search on Arizona state foods, right? I'm in Arizona. I'm in northern central Arizona. I'm about 2/3 of the way between Phoenix and Flagstaff. And I'm looking at what are some of the state foods of Arizona. And it's chimichangas. And I'm trying to think, how would I do a deep fried burrito? I don't know that I do a chocolate chimichanga, although I might have a chocolate sauce of some sort, mole, something or other, which go on top of it. Chimichanga, Sonoran hot dog, bacon wrapped hot dog, doesn't do me any good. Burritos, tamales, Navajo tacos, fry bread, mesquite flour. Now, that's interesting. So mesquite flour as an ingredient might be something that could be used to make a cracker. So a mesquite flour cracker. Again, I'd need at least a dehydrator to do that. So a raw mesquite flour cracker. There is a slight sweetness to it. Maybe I could refine some mesquite flour into a chocolate. Something to think about right there. Prickly pear. Oh my gosh, I'm here in Arizona. Prickly pear is everywhere. What could I do with prickly pear in it? I could do a dehydrated prickly pear. I could do a freeze-dried prickly pear. I could do prickly pear jam, a mermelada. I mean, there are lots of things that I can do. I could take freeze-dried, powder it, refine the freeze-dried powder into the chocolate. I mean, there are lots of things that I can do just by looking around and going, what we've got going on. Other notable foods, carne seca, not a whole lot I'm going to do there, right? Steak and barbecue, saguaro. So related to the prickly pear, right? A similar kinds of things like that. So I don't know, right? Tequila Sunrise, for some reason, a signature drink in Arizona. How would I interpret Tequila Sunrise in a chocolate bar? Interesting concept to think about. How to go about doing that. So this is one place that I can go and I can just do, if you're in Montana or you're in Wyoming or you're in Minnesota or Michigan, you can look around and just do really, really quick. Oh, so the original chopped salad, popular in Phoenix. I don't know what I would do with arugula, smoked salmon, pearl couscous, maybe caramelize a pearl, cook the pearls couscous, dehydrate it and caramelize it at the same time, especially if it's, the pearl couscous, big couscous. Pepitas, so pumpkin seeds, that's a great thing to do. Dried sweet corn, another thing that can be done. Buttermilk herb dressing. Why don't I use powdered buttermilk in a chocolate rather than powdered milk? Or you get the idea. You will find inspirations, right, for the foods that are very, very common where you live. right? And that what you will do is you will find, okay, right, the people in your area will also respond to them because they're very, very common things that they find in their area. And David Briggs at Chocolate de Vide in Portland used to do a pig's blood chocolate ganache once a year, right? Very, very small quantities, and it got him press, right, every year. So don't be afraid to do something that seems ludicrous and outrageous because number one, maybe it sells, maybe it doesn't. But if you can get a lot of press coverage from it, okay, right? That's a really important thing to do. And if all you're doing is making, a 2-ingredient chocolate that's the same as everybody else is making, going and find something that's different. And I can tell you that, Monsoon Chocolate here in Arizona, they're down in Tucson, is starting to do some of this, right? And I think they're doing some of it quite well, right? Thinking about things that are unique to Arizona. So is there an Arizona state fruit, right? Arizona is weird. I mean, if you were to go to many other states, they have state fruits. Arizona does not have an officially designated state fruit, right? So, but we do produce a lot of fruit, right? So, number one, they grow a lot of dates. There's a citrus industry, particularly lemons, right? So, an Arizona lemon something. So, could I take lemon peel? Could I take the juice? Could I then reduce it? I mean, there are lots of ways to incorporate lemon into chocolate bars. And so you can also candy lemon, right? Candy lemon peels. We grow a lot of pecans here in Arizona, so that would be something I do. Cactus blossom, we've talked about the saguaro. While not a fruit, is Arizona's official state flower, right? So there are ways to incorporate those elements. Go look for the state fruit, right? What is the state dessert, right? Do we have a state dessert? There's not an officially designated state dessert. Georgia might be peach pie, right? Georgia's probably going to be the peach as the state fruit. I mean, there will be something. So we do make a lot of sopapillas, right? So, interesting, right? So could I take the idea of a sopapilla and how would I incorporate chocolate into a sopapilla or a sopapilla into chocolate, right? Two very, very interesting questions. We already talked about prickly pear. Fry bread is another thing that would make sense. It's often served with honey, powdered sugar, maybe some cinnamon, obviously dates, as we mentioned, and mesquite flour, as we talked about at the top of this. So these are things which people who are curious culinarists, right? People who are interested in food in general are going to say, oh, I've never thought about this before. I'm going to go try this. And again, maybe you got some notoriety, and that would be a good thing to do. So I'm looking at favorite Arizona State Fair foods. So if you're at the California State Fair or you're at the Nebraska State Fair, it's like we've got deep fried Oreos and things like that. I wouldn't have thought as the Arizona State Fair food is like a lobster roll, which is one of the things that's listed here. Fry bread we've talked about, birria. So hot Cheeto cheese chicken on a stick. And while I don't know that I would try to put chicken, although there are ways I would think about putting chicken into chocolate, believe it or not, right? Although if I'm doing a mole chocolate bar, I want to have it turkey, not chicken, because turkeys are native to the Americas and chickens are native to China. There's that little bit of things, but yeah, we could do, could we incorporate chicken some way into a chocolate bar with mole? It sounds really weird. You might need FDA approval because you're handling meat. So you might have to have a special permit in order to do that. Something to think about. We have fruit roll-ups. So hot Cheeto cheesy pickle pizza. That sounds awful, right? Right? For those who like spicy and tangy flavors. But what it does say is, okay, right, here is something that state fair goers love, and it represents an interesting place to go with chocolate, and it could be intriguing enough. Like chocolate covered pickles, chocolate covered dill pickles. I've had some and they're not great. Or at least the ones I've had were not great, right? But a lot of people are buying them just because it's a unique thing to have and to try, right? And so think about that. Funnel cakes, what could we do with a funnel cake in chocolate? I can think about 11 things right now. So look at things that are favorite foods at your state fair or in the state fairs around the state where you live in. I took a look at nuts grown commercially in Arizona, so that we grow a lot of pecans. So that's good to know. So if I wanted to do something with nuts here, also pistachios, right, are the two primary nut crops, but we also have almonds and cashews, which are grown here. It turns out that we don't have a lot of pinon trees, so there's not a huge amount of commercial pine nut production. I think that's mainly New Mexico. And even if I were to do something here, I did ask that question, pine nuts in Arizona. Mexico is next to me, so I have hatch chilies, so I have green and red chilies. We have the whole range of chili pepper and that we can use to this. Mesquite is sometimes used as a wood for smoking, right, for barbecue here in Arizona. So there are lots of ways to explore those kinds of smoked flavors as well. And so as we rethink craft chocolate, which is the title for this episode, there are a couple of things that we can do. Number one is, what does it mean to be craft, right? And I think that the way to position craft, at least in English in North America, as Zelia has pointed out to me, is that we're going to use craft in conjunction with specialty. So if I can be a craft chocolate maker, and this might be, Zelia, how we go about taking care of this, is the craft chocolate makers use specialty cocoa beans. And so it's craft chocolate, and we're going to use craft chocolate, in this case, specialty chocolate, synonymously, or to mean pretty much the same thing, right? And we're going to separate it with commodity or industrial, right? So we're going to do that. So if we're going to be craft chocolate, it means that what we do is we look at the beans and we use the beans as inspiration for things. We're going to use local cuisines, local culture as inspiration for doing things. And if I think around to an award-winning chocolate maker that does this really well, one of them is Fuan. And another one would be Fosso. They're taking flavors which are very, very typical, right, as a part of their local cuisine, and they're finding interesting ways to incorporate them into chocolate. And I think that's really important because it makes this specialty chocolate, it makes this craft chocolate really, really accessible to their local market. And for people who do have cosmopolitan international tastes, it makes them interesting and intriguing to them as well, right? And I think that's really, really important, that we take the ideas of craft as an expression of the cocoa beans, right? Craft as an expression of specialty cocoa beans, as opposed to commodity as an expression of commodity cocoa beans, right? Right? There's nothing about scale there. There's nothing about origin there. There's nothing about specific genetics. It's cocoa beans that have been deemed to be special, right? Because of the flavor and flavor potential that they represent, as opposed to commodity, which is 80%, 90% of the rest of the world, right? Really, really important to make that separation. And that you as a maker, right, take inspiration from the beans, from food culture, and you use those inspirations to do interesting things with what it is that you make. You let the cocoa beans, your goal is to express the flavor of the cocoa beans, right? To maximize the expression of flavor of the cocoa beans. You're going to interpret the flavor of the cocoa beans through your lens, right, of your artistic lens as a chocolate maker. And that your expression of these beans is going to be different from other people's expressions of these beans, right? And I think that if we start thinking about craft chocolate that way, right, that way, then what we do is we've created a framework, number one, for how do I address the fact that cocoa beans are becoming increasingly expensive. Well, what you're going to do is you're going to look around at food inspiration around you. If I'm in Arizona, I'm trying to think of, if I go back to New York City, I think about foods which are very, very New York, and I go bagels. Is there something I could do with chocolate and bagels? I can think of lots of things. There's a particular Pennsylvania Dutch style pretzel, which is very, very, very popular in New York City. There are all sorts of things that I can use, right, to be able to create products, right, which incorporate this craft chocolate, this expression of specialty cocoa beans, right, but that have ingredients in them that make them more accessible to a wider range of potential customers, in part because these inclusions, these other ingredients, are less expensive than cocoa. Has become in the last year, and that's where I think what we want to be able to address how craft is important and why forgetting what boxes are, forgetting about what bean to bar means, forgetting about all of these other things that, put blinkers around the way we're thinking, that limit what it is we're thinking about. They're assumptions that we don't challenge. And I think that's one of the things that we all need to do on a regular basis is challenge our assumptions. Is there something we're overlooking? If we think about this interpretation or use language slightly different, was there something overlooking? This doesn't work in Portuguese, for example, or it doesn't work in Brazilian Portuguese. Maybe it would work in Portugal. I don't know. I mean, I can ask that question to friends of mine who make chocolate in Portugal. Fechoria de Cacao, also Nicolo Corallo. Those are two people that I would ask there, and other people that I would ask in Brazil and other countries in the world. But what do you think? When we're long past the time, this is a fascinating topic for me. I want to thank everybody who started at the beginning and watched through to the end. You'll be able to throw comments into the YouTube comments feed after we get done, not the live chat, obviously, on the Facebook page, on the LinkedIn page, as well as on the Chocolate Life. And with that, I want to say thanks, everybody. I appreciate your support and watching through to the end. This coming Tuesday, which is, the 30th of July, I'm going to be having an interview with Luciana Monteiro. Speaking of Brazil, Luciana is with Aracacao in Campesina in the state of São Paulo. We're going to be talking about Brazilian cacao and Brazilian chocolate makers and things like that. So come back on Tuesday, the 30th, 10 o'clock, and we'll be joined by Luciana. Until then, everyone, remember, if you're working with chocolate and you're not having fun, you're doing it wrong. Until the next time, everybody, ciao. I have to click the end screen buttons. Forget that. One more comment. Also, we acknowledge the importance of the work done by the farmers in order to get specialty beans, as well as their needs to be able to produce quality cacao. So that's part of the definition of specialty cacao that's baked into a definition of specialty chocolate, I think, or craft chocolate. But the answer is absolutely yes. Recognition of farmers. First off, it's flavor, right? Because we could treat farmers well with commodity coffee. Just we need to be very, very careful about the kinds of language and kinds of terminology we bring in, because the importance of the work farmer, are we talking about ethical and traceable and other kinds of things? There's a very, very fine line there. And I think it's really, really important to be able to make sure that we're very, very clear about what it is that we mean. It's a great thing, Maria, to bring that home and mention it. I want to be careful about having a core definition that everybody can agree to, and we don't layer onto it concepts, right? That somebody go, I have an objection to that, and therefore I'm going to object to the entire idea because there's this little tiny thing there that I have a problem agreeing to. I think it's really important. It's a really important point that you made, and it's one that I will continue to consider how to incorporate that idea into these definitions of craft and specialty and commodity and specialty and industrial, right? When it comes to coffee and chocolate and beer and spirits and wine and cheese. All of these fermented foods that are yummy, delicious, and are all tightly intertwined, right? In terms of how we think about them, in terms from a flavor perspective, and how we talk about them. And with that, everyone, that's the end of this episode. We'll see you on the next one, and until then, have fun.